Question Lane. Solving problems through the process of questions and answers.
Welcome to the Question Lane, where the goal is to solve problems through the process of questions and answers. Today's guest is Charles Ford, author of The Anatomy of a Corporate Lynching. Mr. Ford, what would you like me to refer to you as, Mr. Ford, Charles, or what's good for you?
Charles is fine.
Charles, it will be. Perfect.
Okay.
Is there anything you want us to know about you before we get started?
No, that's a good question. No.
Okay, perfect. So I read your book, and for me, the most important takeaway from reading the book is a statement you made towards the end of the book, which is you have to always remember that you are not put on this earth to be exploited or abused. I thought that was a real profound way to kind of wrap up the book. What was your thought process on making that statement?
Well, the thought process behind that was just acknowledging that a lot of people who find themselves in adverse situations, they get so used to it, especially when you go through it a lot. You tend to get so used to being in a subdued position that you accept it. And you grow into it thinking that this is just the way things are, the natural flow of things. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. You know, I think that we should be more proactive with our lives and the situations that we encounter so that we don't walk around feeling bad and being the walking wounded and a punching bag for society. So that was the thought process behind that.
Okay. So by the cover, it seems like you're a black male. Is that accurate?
Yes, sir.
Okay, got it. Why did you choose the title, The Anatomy of a Corporate Lynching?
Because I wanted to tell the story to show people how it was done, how they did what they did. And I called it anatomy because the anatomy, it shows the several parts that make up the body. And I wanted to show the several parts that made up the culmination of the corporate lynching that they used against me. I wanted to show how it was done, what they did to see to it that I was lynched corporately. And it was a number of things that they did to pile up the justification to let me go and do what they did. And that's where the title came from.
Another word that was kind of prevalent throughout the book is justice. When you use the word justice, what did you mean?
Well, I used it in different scenarios, so it depends on what I was saying at that time. Could you give me a specific statement from the book?
Yes. You said, let me see, this was at the beginning of the book here. Let me read this part right here. Mm-hmm. You said, by the time I first met Miss Mickens, so many events had transpired already in my pursuit of justice. I was overwhelmed and had no interest in anything but getting Con Edison to be held responsible for what they have done. So in that context, what did you mean when you used the word justice?
Okay, I wanted them to have to be held responsible for what they did and to implement some kind of fairness and to equalize what I felt was an injustice that was done to me. I wanted to get balance with the situation because it was unbalanced in terms of how fair things turned out.
So a policy change along with some type of compensation would have been an accurate way of describing what you meant when you used the word justice, correct?
Yeah, I would say policy change, but more so for them to acknowledge what they did and definitely compensate me for my attempt to help them out, which they clearly saw fit as far as the use of what I brought to them within the company confines, as far as like the using the term that I came to them with, the suggestion that I brought to them. Just acknowledge it and, compensate. Because rather than acknowledge what I did and what they did, they went into this thing of denial. And it forced me, being the person that I am, where I'm not going to just sit back and allow you to get away with something that clearly was not right. It forced me to have to go and incur legal fees just to get them to acknowledge what they did.
Now, towards the beginning of the book, you talked about your formation, the formation of the start of your employment at Con Edison. You talked about you were in college. This job was more of something that you had just got into, but as as the probationary period was winding down, you were informed by a supervisor that you needed to get your production percentage up. Was that something that you were made aware of before you started the job, about what would be the minimum percentage you needed to meet in order to make it out of that probationary period?
No, I didn't know how they measured your performance and how they were going to judge whether you were to remain employed with them in the beginning. All I knew is that it took you like 3 months before you became made within the union and accepted. And if you didn't work, if your work was subpar or below their standards, then they had the right to let you go. So, like if you came in and you had a lateness issue, or you were just not reliable and your performance was really bad or unsatisfactory, then they would have the right to let you go, and you couldn't get union representation. So I knew that much, but as far as like how they would judge whether you were good or not, I didn't even know what the job entailed. I only learned it like as I went on. I mean, I learned that I was going to be a meter reader when I went to the orientation, but I didn't know what that entailed, what it involved, what I was going to wind up doing, how difficult it was going to be, the situations that I was going to have to overcome once I got out into the field, the conditions, the rats, the sewage. I didn't know about that. And it wasn't until I got out there and I did those routes that I realized how difficult it was. And they had no tolerance. They didn't really care what you went through. And I kind of depicted that when I told the story about how I went to a basement where it was a lot of sewage. And rather than tell me, well, you don't have to read the meters this month because of that sewage condition, they came out and met me in the field with a pair of fireman boots that they wanted me to put on and walk through that slush to get the meat. So once I saw what was involved and what I was going to have to encounter or deal with on a day-to-day basis doing that job, I knew, I can't, I'm not going to last doing this because I'm not going to continue walking through this sewage. I'm not going to keep doing that. And I knew at that point, if they decided, well, your percentage isn't up, you weren't willing to walk through that sewage like we asked you to, we want to let you go, I wouldn't have had union representation. So I put up with it that time, but then I knew this ain't going to last long.
Well, I'm asking because as the progression of the book allowed me to understand your story more, training seemed to be a huge, huge problem throughout your book, and I found that to be rather interesting, that an employee that really was interested in learning their job and what they needed to do to be successful and productive for the company was something that was not rewarded. Can you talk about how the lack of training affected your morale and your ability to work productively with the team?
Yes, it killed my morale. It killed it, because once I left that meter reader or the meter operations department where I was reading meters and I felt like I was going to a different department, the people at the Learning Center who took your application and went over with you administratively and on paper what you were going to be doing, they seemed to be very receptive and encouraging. But it's once I got to the location where I was going to work, where you dealt with the supervisors, that's where the problem was. And that's where I learned that they didn't really have anything in place to train the guys. You know, you had to basically get out there and just sink or swim. You know, they would put you with whoever was on a watch, whatever person that had the senior title already, and expect you to work with them, walk around with them all day so that you can see how the work is done, how to do the job. And that was their way of giving you on-the-job training, not factoring in that some of these people that they were sending these new hires or hirees out to work with, they weren't teachers. You know, they weren't given, like, they didn't display any evidence that they were able to teach anybody. Just because you have a title, it doesn't mean that you know how to teach someone and bring them up so that they can understand what the job entails. And that's what happened with me. You know, they put me with people who really didn't want to teach because they felt like, hey, this new guy's coming in, you know, they're going to take over this overtime. They're going to kill our ability to make the kind of money that we've always made. And you can't complain about that, because once you complain about it, now those senior guys are really not going to work with you. They're going to, oh, this guy's, he's looking to, you know, tell on us and write letters complaining. Then they're not going to want to work with you. And then the company had an incentive to not train you, because had you gotten the training that you needed and you had gotten your title by a certain date, it would mean that they would have to give you the raise and the progressions that you were entitled to. So it was beneficial for them to just not do anything with you until like the next quarter, and then the next quarter after that. And it became very discouraging, extremely discouraging. So I can understand how anybody in a situation like that, it's like they would lose their morale and their drive to continue putting their best foot forward when you feel like there's nobody there to help you, and they don't show any care for you.
It sounds like management or your supervisors had what I would call discretion as opposed to focusing on policy and procedure as it relates to training you. Would that be accurate?
Very accurate. Very accurate. Because there was nothing stating that, okay, well, you have to put the new hirees with someone who is proven to be an excellent trainer. You know, they just put you with whoever was on the watch that day.
Did you receive an employee handbook or a manual outlining your position or what was expected of you or what the progression would be for this type of position that you started in?
Oh, yeah. Well, every 4 years when the union and company contractual negotiations come up, whatever agreement that the union comes to with the company, they produce a handbook, a union handbook that's distributed to all of the employees in the company. And in that book, it tells you each title within the company and the wage progression that would be given to each employee depending on what department they're in every year. Like, they'll let you know what you're going to get in October, what you're going to get in February, what you're going to get in June. You know, and that yearly cost of living rate, they let you know what you're going to get. So that's what we would look at. We would say, okay, well, if we would pass, let's say, for instance, the February progression that would come, we try to get our test no later than January so we can get our title and then we would get what that title says we were entitled to wage-wise. But they would just hold off and say, oh, we don't have anybody to give you your exam until, like, June, late June. And then they'd say, well, okay, we don't have anybody until July. Now you've missed the February progression and the June cost of living raise. And then it's like after I went through the whole lawsuit thing with the company, then they really wasn't trying to help me out. My morale was down, and it just got really ugly at that point. And then I saw the campaign that they were embarking on and, suspending me and making up reasons to not let me get training so that I could have my exam.
Another thing that I noticed in the book was how you would be called into meetings and accused of certain infractions, but then when you challenge the infractions and the validity of their report, there would be immediate withdrawal of the complaint and the suspension that was levied upon your employment at Con Edison. How frequent was these type of incidents, not only with yourself, but also with other coworkers?
Well, I couldn't speak on what happened with other coworkers because I didn't really know, like, the situations that happened with every other employee. If something happened, the other employee would have the right to keep that stuff personal, and they wouldn't come out and talk about it. But I do know that it happened to me once, and then they attempted to do it again, and I didn't allow it to happen, where they wanted to withdraw the grievance if I agreed to their terms. Because at first I didn't really know what they were doing, and I was under the guidance of union representation at that time that really didn't understand my plight or concern. They were just, going through the motions. Their shift that day was from 7 to 3, and they happened to be on, and I needed a shop steward to go in with me. And even though that shop steward didn't know my work, didn't understand what my job was to do as a new hiree, and it was from a completely different department, the fact that they were a shop steward in that department, that was reason enough for them to allow that person to come in and quote-unquote represent me. So they didn't really have any stake in what I was trying to accomplish. They was just like, okay, well, accept what they're telling you. It's not a bad thing, and I accepted it. But after I accepted it and I saw what they were trying to do and do the same thing, overcharge you and then tell you, well, we'll reduce it if you agree to not challenge it, I knew that they were trying to stack charges on me so that when they put it in front of an arbitrator, the arbitrator would really have the impression that I was a bad employee.
It sounds like an employment version of a plea deal.
Yeah. Where you're admitting to something that you really are not guilty of, but you just want to reduce what they're throwing at you, and you don't feel like you have enough defense on your side to get through or to fight it and win. Especially when you have a shop steward saying, I wouldn't challenge it. It seems like it's okay. Accept it. And these are your representatives telling you that. Basically, your lawyer. Your shop steward is basically like a lawyer.
Did you ever receive any of these notifications in writing as it relates to when they said the meeting is going to be on X date? If you don't challenge this, you will be levied with this penalty. Did you ever receive any of that in writing, or was it just a verbal communication between you, management, and your shop steward representative?
No, they usually said that I would get word from the shop steward that it was verbal. It was a verbal thing. They didn't give me anything, you know.
That's definitely a suggestion I would give to the audience. Anytime you have any situation with management as it relates to issues that where they're saying questioning your performance, I would get everything in writing. If they say that they accuse you of something, you have a meeting about it, and it could be marks on your record, but then they withdraw that once you challenge it and present evidence. I would like to get the retraction of accusations in writing, so that everybody knows what's going on for the records. Because anytime it's verbal, it seems to create a lot of issues, and even if you have a representative, they might not be on your side like it was in Charles Ford's case. The job as a CFR became dangerous. In the early and mid-90s, the crack era was still in full effect. That was a statement from your book. What type of people generally was assigned to buildings that were known for drug dealing?
What type of people were assigned to buildings that were known? I'm trying to understand your question. What do you mean by what type of people?
Well, I'm asking was it like people that were senior? Was it a mix of people that were just starting on a job? Was it people who were on a probationary period? Was it a mix of people? That's basically what I'm trying to get at.
No, I mean, it was whoever had the route that day within the parameters of that neighborhood or that area. And in my situation, it was Harlem. And we worked a 21-day cycle from 110th Street all the way up to the Polo Grounds. And you would have each meter reader had a set of 21 routes that they did from the beginning of the month to the end of the month. And whatever building was on your route, you had to do it. You know, it just depends on the person. If you called in sick on a Wednesday, then they would give your route to someone else, someone who was available to do it. It wasn't like they said this person has to do this route.
I was just curious to see if there was any type of routing of someone's job to be able to read the meters in like dangerous sections of town, or I just wanted to make sure that I understood. Want to make sure I understood what you meant when you wrote that phrase. But the poor man's copyright, what is that, and how did you learn about that concept?
Well, I learned about that when I was a teenager, and I made my foray into songwriting. And once I learned the importance of protecting what you create, one of the things that I learned about was copywriting it with the Library of Congress. But during the interim, when you immediately create something and you want a fast way to protect yourself, and you didn't have the money necessarily at that point to copyright it or register it with the Library of Congress, then you do what's called the poor man's copyright, where you put what you created on paper, you write it down, and then you mail it to yourself. You put a stamp, you get a stamp on it, and you mail it to yourself on the envelope. You mail it to yourself, and when it comes back to you, you don't open it. You leave it closed until there's some kind of infraction or someone tries to infringe upon what you created, and then you pull that envelope, that unopened envelope out that has the contents of your creation, and that would be your evidence as to what date you created it. And I learned that early on.
What motivated you to create a new catchphrase, or I guess corporate identity? I'm thinking of a word here. Basically, what made you think about presenting an idea to the company for consideration?
Well, because I have a creative mind, and I'm always, just thinking of things. If I'm not coming up with a melody or some kind of lyric to write, my mind is just always in a creative mode. And when I used to hear the tagline that the company was using in media, I just challenged myself to see if I could come up with something better than that. It's just my creative mind.
Okay. One of the lines in your book was some of the veteran operators were very hostile and would hold back information. How was information withheld from you, and what effect do you think that played on you making errors on a job?
Well, it didn't affect me where I would make an error, because the only time you can make an error is after you get the title. They were keeping me from even getting that title, where I could make an error. And, one of the ways that they would withhold information is, like, you would ask them a question, like, what is this particular fuse thing that's on the mimic panel here? And they would tell you that it was something other than what it is. And then you would go around thinking that that's what it was, only to learn that it wasn't. Or sometimes you would ask them a question and they say, well, you tell me. You ask them and they tell you, their answer would be, you tell me. And, where on one hand you would think, okay, that should motivate you to get out there and hustle to get the information. There's this undertone to it that just suggests that the people don't want you to know. And it's hard working with someone like that.
Do you think racism was involved as it related to the withholding of information towards you? Was it the case, or was it a combination of all, or both?
I think racism played a part as far as how the company dealt with my grievance and what happened, what it transpired, how they tried to brush it under the rug, how they tried to not acknowledge what I did bring to them, where they first denied that I was even telling the truth, and then once they knew, they still didn't own up to it. Whereas had I been a white employee, yeah, they definitely would have given me accolades and sent out a company email as they displayed their propensity to do in other situations. They didn't do that with me. So I think racism had everything to do with that. But I don't think it had anything to do with the people that I was working with, like the operators that they had put me to work with. I just think those operators, they, for the most part, didn't really care to help the new guys coming in. Because at that point, it had been like a good 20 to 25 years before they had hired anybody in that department. But then there was this mass retirement thing going on in the department, and they needed people to fill those spots. And then they started hiring people. So, for the first time within 20 to 25 years, these operators are now having to deal with people who would possibly limit the amount of overtime that they would be getting. So they kind of had an attitude about that. And I think that was more their attitude and unwillingness to help the new guy, and particularly me, was because I was another hiree that they were going to have to contend with, number one. And the way the company was making me look like I was a troublemaker, they didn't take too well to me. They didn't really feel comfortable with me. They was believing the hype at that time.
Okay, there was a meeting that you talked about with Johnny Nicase. Am I saying his name right?
Nicase. Mm-hmm.
Johnny Nicase and Miss Savino. There was a meeting where they pulled you in, and there was a retraction of an accusation, as I spoke about earlier. Can you briefly outline that interaction and what was the conclusion of that meeting?
Yeah, Johnny Nicase was a supervisor, a white supervisor, tall guy. You know, he kind of liked to throw his weight around, and he felt like he would intimidate people. He didn't like my drive to try to learn. And now with his situation, yeah, I say that was racism. That was pure racism. I know it was. And he would give me a directive to do something, and then I would do it, and then he'd say he didn't say that. He didn't tell me to do it. And vice versa. And in this particular case, he saw me getting ready to leave with the company vehicle to go up the block and get coffee. And he asked me if I had gotten permission to use the vehicle. And I told him, yeah, I got permission, because the rule was that you don't just take the company vehicle off the premises. You have to get permission. Because the last thing you want to do is take the company vehicle and you go out and you have an accident. Now you're in trouble because you didn't make the company aware of what was going on with the vehicle. And they could always say, no, we didn't want you to take that vehicle. Or they could say, well, we were planning on moving one of the employees to another station with that rig, and you took it out, and you prevented us from having access to it when we needed it in an emergency. So I didn't want to be responsible for that. And I'm a new guy coming in, so I was following protocol. I told him, yes, I did get permission. And there's a phone that we have to call to get permission that's a taped line. When you pick that phone up and you communicate with the shift manager, everything you say to the shift manager is recorded. So clearly, you know, I requested permission to take the vehicle to go out and get coffee, as I was told I had to by the operators there. And I went, I got the coffee and came back. And next thing you know, I don't know, a couple of days later, sometime later, I was called in. They said they wanted to conduct a fact-finding. And Mr. Nicase was there with his boss, a woman named Michelle Savino. And there was a shop steward and a couple other supervisors. And they made this accusation that one of the things that I'm doing where I'm not following company protocol, and it poses a threat to my existence on that job, was that I took the company vehicle without getting permission. And I said, what are you talking about? And then Mr. Nicase, I was made aware that he had told his boss that instance when I told him that I had gotten permission to use the vehicle, he said that I didn't have permission to use it. And I mean, I just couldn't believe that he did that, you know. So he's clearly poisoning my reputation in the minds of his boss and the people who are witnessing this. And I kind of threw a little monkey wrench in the situation where I said, you know what? I want to prove that I got permission. And I told you I got permission. I want to have all of the recordings pulled so that you can hear exactly what I said on the shift manager's line. And his boss got up and had to go to a meeting. And after his boss left, one of the supervisors were reading the notes from that meeting before we disbanded. And they said, okay, well, we're going to do A, we're going to do B, and C, we're going to pull the recordings from such and such date to find out what was said and if Mr. Ford indeed got permission. And then Case says, Charlie, no, we're not going to pull the recording. I know you got permission to take the vehicle. And now the only person that did not witness him do that or say that was his boss that had left. The other supervisors there witnessed it. The shop steward witnessed it. And nothing became of it. Nothing became of it.
That's exactly why I suggest that people get these things in writing, where everybody is clear on what was said in the meeting, what the accusation was, and what was the result of the meeting. Because that was something where I read that and I said, wow, that's interesting for for him to just say, you know what, nope, never mind. You don't have to pull the recordings. It's all fine. Mm-hmm. Didn't he reach across the table and try to shake your hand?
Yeah, tried to reach over to shake my hand. Yes. Yes, he did. Mm-hmm.
Sounds like it was a deliberate attempt to kind of get you riled up and make you do something rash so you could get fired. Would that be accurate?
Very accurate. And I knew it. I knew that they were trying to get me to do something so that they could, implement my ouster from the company. And I didn't do anything quick enough, so they just started making things up. And this is common. This is common with a lot of employees. A lot of employees are going through stuff like that. I mean, just from the response that I've gotten from many Con Ed employees after the book came out, the stuff that I've been hearing is just like, it's unbelievable. But then again, it is believable because I lived it. I went through it, so I know. But it's just that when you see it coming out and people telling you the kind of stuff that they went through, it's like, man, wow, okay. There it is.
Can you explain the importance of creativity? We spoke about it a little bit earlier when you developed a tagline for the company. Can you explain the importance of creativity and how do you assess its value? Because it sounded like earlier, when you presented the idea to the company, you were just looking for maybe, $500 and a recognition of your works in the company letter. But as you found out how much the company paid to an ad firm, it kind of made you think about the importance of creativity and how you should assess value to that. So can you explain that process and what's your thoughts on that?
Well, the importance of creativity will vary from person to person. Some people may have a level of creativity that they're not actively trying to make something out of. So it's not really going to mean anything to them. They really wouldn't care what happens to something that they may create, kind of like George Washington Carver. George Washington Carver invented so many ways to use the peanut. And he could have easily patented that stuff and made a fortune for all of his descendants and family to come years later. But he didn't really feel it like that. He wasn't really trying to capitalize on it. He just wanted to give it to mankind. So in cases like that, you can't really emphasize the importance of creativity because those people are not going to get it. They're not going to feel it like that. But if you are a creative person, it's important to realize that what you create, especially if you're trying to make something out of it, it's important for you to realize that you are worth something. You are worth more, in a lot of cases, more than you even believe. And by not being a part of the machine, we don't really get a chance to see what kind of money flows for some of the things that we easily create. We're just not in that circle, so we don't really see what we can do. We're not encouraged to do it because once you're in that circle and you see the kind of money that you can generate for what you create, that will stimulate a drive for you to create even more and stay in that circle and get even better and better at it. But some of us, we're good at what we do, and we continue to get better even though we're not in the circle. It's just so embedded in our blood to be creative, and we hold value to it, but if we don't see it doing anything, we tend to either devalue it or just give up outright doing it, thinking that we're not going to get anywhere. We can't do anything. There's no vehicle. There's no outlet for us to express our creativity. But it's important for us to realize that it really has value, and you have to place value on what it is that you do, because where you don't, others will. Others will, and they will capitalize off of it happily and leave you with crumbs or next to nothing.
That sounds logical. As your career progressed, I believe this was in late 2001, you had a statement in your book where you said you wanted to document everything that Nikkei demonstrated. That Nikkei said, so that you could demonstrate that he was a liar and you had proof that it happened. Now, what gave you the mentality to get a recorder and start recording all your conversations with your manager in, 2001?
Because I realized that Con Edison management, upper management, were like the United States court systems, and how they will believe anything a supervisor says happened the way that the United States court systems will believe anything a New York a policeman or policewoman says happened, or police or officer in the country in general. Whatever they say happened, the U.S. court system backs them up. And with that kind of situation going on, you don't have any defense unless you have proof. We already saw what happened with Rodney King. Even with the evidence, the videotape that they saw, they still figured out a way to get out of it and deny it. The way that they did it is they slowed the videotape down so you couldn't see the brute force of those batons being hit on Rodney King's body when he was down. And they were able to do this. The court system allowed them to slow it down, put it in slow motion. So when those batons and nightsticks were hitting them, you couldn't really feel it the way you would feel it if you saw it playing at its actual speed. So they got all kind of technology, all these kind of games, and the system is rigged to not give you the justice, is that word, to not give justice where it favors the employee or the civilian. And once I felt like that, once I saw that that's how Con Ed was getting down, that's when I said, I have no choice, because whatever I tell upper management happened, they're not going to believe me, they're not going to support it, and they're still going to go with their quota to suspend me. And I wanted evidence the next time Nikkei lied. And that was that was the reason that I started recording all the conversations I had with her.
You talked about when you complained and wrote letters about your lack of training, that you were made out to be a troublemaker and someone who was not doing their job correctly. Did you ever receive any responses in writing, or was all of these responses verbal?
Okay, now, when you say responses, you mean where I learned that I was being seen as a troublemaker?
Correct.
No, they would never put anything like that in writing. It was just word of mouth would go around, and people were starting to get an impression about me because of what management were telling people.
So
some people were good enough with me where they told me what they heard. You know, like, it's being said this about you, and that's being said about you. And I'm like, really? Yeah, it was very interesting. And, you know, management would never say it to my face. They would never come up to me and bring a gripe. They would do it behind my back. They would send emails to one another about me. And that's when I really realized that these people were just, like, painting this crazy picture of me. And people, like supervisors that I didn't even know, you know, you would meet them for the first time, and they had a preconceived notion about you based on what they heard. Never mind where they heard it from, but the word of mouth got out. That was put out by management, and they just fell right in line.
So what do you suggest that people do if they see someone else on their job getting mistreated and labeled as a troublemaker and not doing their job correctly, etc.? What do you suggest that they do if they're not necessarily in the position but they see the mistreatment occurring? What do you suggest that they do to kind of at least try to help solve the problem, or what's your suggestions as it relates to that?
I would suggest that they do nothing. And let me explain why I say that. The person who's being exploited has to have the drive to do something for themselves first. You seeing what's going on is going to mean nothing. Because if you go up and try to speak up for that person, there's a big chance that person who you're trying to represent and encourage to go and fight, that they'll fall back and they'll let you do all the heavy lifting. And then when the question is put on the person who's being exploited, are you being exploited? And then they turn around and say, no, it's not that bad. No, I'm not going through anything, because they fear losing whatever position that they have. And now that's left you out on the limb. For what? Now, if that person is willing to fight and you see that they're really about it, then yeah, you champion it. You rock with them. You encourage them. You help them out the best that you can. But the person, it all starts with the person, and it ends with the person who's in it, who's going through it. Because at any moment, they can leave you hanging. And that's not a good look right there.
So if you're on a job and a coworker is gossiping about another coworker and talking about their performance and that they should get fired, would you suggest that someone said something to the degree of, excuse me, what can we do to help this person to do what they can to be productive on a job? Do you think something like that, asking a question and not really making an accusation, but just asking a question about what can we do to help this person that seems to not be able to do their job correctly, do you think that might be a way of going about things in a more subtle way, or would you suggest silence if the person is not willing to fight?
Well, I certainly would recommend talking to the person and offering whatever it is that you can help them with, so that they won't get left behind and that they'll be afforded the same opportunities as others who may have been better situated than they were, especially when you know that it's something that they're missing, and all you got to do is just basically hand them that information and just put them on the right track. By all means, yes, I would suggest helping a person like that. You don't leave them hanging. You don't leave them hanging like that. And I've actually done that before. I've done that a couple of times with coworkers where I saw something that they were either not getting to as far as training, and I would give them information, just to pull them up. That's what you're supposed to do.
Another one of these meetings that you talk about in your book was management called you in to let you know that you were going to receive your title after you passed your exam, but you wouldn't receive training for another 6 months. again, was there a stipulation about how long or how soon you're supposed to get training, or was this more of a discretionary choice that they made as it relates to you?
No, it was a discretionary choice that they made regarding my employment. This was directed at me, and they had it in writing, and I recorded them say it.
Yeah, I never heard of a case where training is just such a it's like a weapon. It's like, you can't read.
Right.
Wow, wow, that is really something. What do you suggest people do to help them stay calm and to stay focused on solving problems on their job instead of getting riled up when they're confronted with all of these different kind of scenarios that could ordinarily get someone in a position to get out of character?
Well, I would heavily suggest that they write every encounter down that they experience, because over the course of a day or 3 or 4, your information might be a little watered down, and you might omit certain things when you try to recount what transpired a month or 2 later. So whenever something happens, write it down. We have cell phones now. Everybody has a cell phone. If you're not a good writer, take your cell phone out and go to the voice memo and just talk. Record for a minute or 2, whatever it is that you just went through, record it so that you can memorialize it and refer to it later. And it'll be fresh, and you will have a greater account of what happened so that you can refer to it if and when it comes a time where you have to go and get legal assistance, because legal assistance relies on every bit of information you can provide them. And sometimes we're not that good with the pen, and that might intimidate a lot of us, where it's like we don't want to write because it's not something that we like doing, and we don't want to especially try to write a story about something that happened. So many people will just pass it up because they don't think they can hang their words right. So the easiest way to do that is to just pull out your cell phone and record into your voice memo what you just experienced. And the cell phones are so equipped now where you can talk into it and it'll transcribe what you're saying itself. It'll do it for you. So that's the best way. I think that's what people should do whenever they're going through a situation like that. Because if you don't, you feel like you walk in and you have no ammunition, nothing to go in and defend yourself with. If you scream murder, you have to produce a body. So if you say something happened, where's your evidence? If you don't have any account of what happened, and you have no accuracy, you can't recall what date it happened, what time it happened, where it happened, then you feel like you're empty, like you can't really go in and get people to seriously listen to you. So document everything that you're going through, and keep on going with your day. Don't let it suppress you and depress you and make you feel any kind of way about it. Just feel confident that everything you wrote down or you memorialized via a recording is going to be your defense when you pull it out. That's going to be your ammunition to shoot back at some point.
Great suggestion. I definitely agree with journaling and taking notes. As soon as someone says something that is outside of policy, Nikkei said that I will not be able to get training for 6 months at 5:15 on July 2nd. I definitely agree with that wholeheartedly.
Right. And then if you recorded him say it and he denies it, you won't feel like, oh, it's he say, she say. Now you have evidence. You can show what was said. And I only suggest that when you have a case where people have they've proven themselves to be liars with impunity, where they could just lie on you and get away with it and nobody challenges it. When you're in a corner like that, then you got no choice but to just whip out a way to protect yourself. That the only reason that I ever even employed that on the job is because I felt like I had no way of protecting myself. But those recordings protected me. When the lying kept on going, that's what saved me in a lot of cases.
I definitely see the logic in what you're saying, and the suggestions sound it sounds reasonable to me. I just want to point out that, people should think about, whether your state has two-party consent laws.
Oh, yeah. I'm fully aware of that. They have laws stating that you can't record someone unless they give consent to do so. In my case, I just wanted to have that recording to say, look, I have the recording. Whether you want to let it be admissible in court is on you. But I have evidence right here that this is what happened. And this is their voice saying it. And if they say, well, we don't want to hear it, well, okay. Now you can't say beyond a reasonable doubt. You can't take their word 100% over mine, because here's evidence that you're just turning away from. But fortunately, I was able to show and produce the recordings and submit them so that the company could see what was going on. And the company chose to not do anything about it. They never addressed it. But that was their choice.
As a person who was classified as black, I think you would have a good appreciation for this. There's a quote that I'm pulling from your book where you said, "I look like I have a chip on my shoulder because I didn't smile. You look too serious," she said. This was the EEOC representative who you went to present your case to, and she made that comment. How deflating is the perception of you being angry as a black person and not having a legit grievance? What does that do to your psyche and your mentality for going forward with this type of case?
At first, it angers you. It angered me. It was like, here it is, I'm coming to you. You're my only line of defense, and you can make a difference. And I come to you, and then you look at me stereotypically, like I look like I have a chip on my shoulder. The angry black man. You're right, I'm angry about what happened, but I'm not angry at the world. But it's easy to become angry with the world when it seems like the world doesn't understand or have any interest in your cause and your plot, because you start feeling like, where do I turn to? Where do I turn? Who do I go to? Now, when you take something to somebody, you got it in your head. Well, are they going to think that I have a chip on my shoulder? This last person that I went to thought that. And it can be self-defeating. It can make you not want to go any place. And that's why I wrote the book, because I understand how somebody can get into a space where they just feel like taking a 9mm to work and just spraying the place up. I understood it, because it's like when you hear those stories on the radio or on the news, when you live through something like that, you start questioning. You're like, well, what was going through that person's mind? What did they experience before they resorted to doing what they did? What is it? It's not like the first thing that somebody goes through, they resort to that. It's not like that. It's a story behind everything. We only get what the news media decides to tell us, their spin of it. Christopher Dorner, look at his situation.
That's a police officer in Los Angeles who decided to go against the police department. I believe it was because of all of the attacks on black people, and he was killed by the police after a manhunt went out for his whereabouts. So I definitely understand the sentiment. Can you briefly explain what the EEOC is, and would you suggest that people use this as a way of combating their employers in the case in the court of law? Yes.
Okay. The EEOC is an entity that's set up to deal with discrimination cases that take place at work. They deal with employment issues, and if you go through something where you feel like you've been discriminated, you can go to them to seek some kind of resolution. And I would suggest consulting them, because in order for you to have a case, in order for you to file a case in court, you have to get what's called a notice of a right to sue. Now, although they've raised the bar up so high that it becomes virtually impossible for you to prove that you experienced racism at work, they're basically the only way that you can go to court. So in most cases, 90% of the cases, and 90 is being generous, they're going to turn around and say, oh, well, we don't find that there was any racism done here, but we're not saying that it's completely removed from possibility. Therefore, we're going to give you a notice of a right to sue. That notice of a right to sue is what you can take and go further and get an attorney and press charges or file a case against your employer.
Is this type of action free, or how does that work?
Yes. You go to, or at least when I did it, I went to the EEOC of New York. I told them what was going on. They gave me some forms to fill out, and they told me what I had to bring back as evidence. And once I did that, they would assign me a case worker, somebody who would deal with my case, and then they would go from there. They would contact the company and do whatever investigation that they do. And those are the prerequisites before you can go and file a lawsuit.
Okay. I have 5 more questions. You still have time for that?
Yeah. By the way, where is this curated? Like, where will we be able to hear this? Is there going to be a link, or is this live? How does this go?
No, it's going to be a link. The name of the podcast is called The Question Lane, and the goal is to solve problems through asking questions and developing answers. So this will definitely be up sometime next week. I'll definitely get you a link out. Okay. So you can review it and go over it. So you talked about the importance of having other sources of income. How important, while you're employed, how important is having these different sources of income, and what type of income streams would you suggest that people get into?
Well, it's important to have another source of income besides your job, because, I was always motivated by a phrase that I heard, which was, there's only 2 words that separate an employed man from a homeless person. Those 2 words are "you're fired." And the one thing you don't want to do is be in a situation where once your employer says you're fired, you have no way to eat. You have no way to generate funds to take care of yourself. When you have something in place where you can generate money outside of where you go for your 9 to 5, then you can swim. You won't feel like you're going to sink the minute you're not associated with that your employer. As far as what people can get into, it's a myriad of things. It all depends on the person and what they're willing to do. You can do investments. You can get into real estate. You can pursue your passion and set up a business, incorporate. and do something. Just don't rely on your job for your livelihood. I mean, you can always think of I think it's a good idea to think of your job as a money base to finance what it is that you really want to do, your real passion. As I always say, the thing that you can become wealthy at is the thing that you'll be willing to do for free. Most of us wouldn't go to work in the morning if we knew that we were going to work for free and they weren't going to pay us. We're motivated to get up so early and do those shifts because we know we're going to get a check for it. The minute they tell us we're not going to get a check for it, I don't think any of us are going to be getting up that early to get to work. You know what I mean? But it's the thing that you love doing, that thing that you're not getting paid for, but you love doing it so much, you will do it until the wee hours of the morning because you're passionate about that. That thing that you're passionate about is the thing that you can become wealthy on. And that's the thing that you need to have, that you need to be pursuing on the side while you're doing that job and using that money to help you get that thing that you're passionate about off the ground.
Sounds logical. Developing a purpose, for sure. Who was Mike Schmidt, and what was his role in your depositions?
Mike Schmidt was a coworker of mine. I mean, we entered the department together. We were what you call GUWs, General Utility Workers, and we were similarly situated. You know, we both required a certain level of training so that we can get our assistant's title, and then from there we were going to go and get our senior title. And you know, I would see him like I would see any other coworker. He'd come in the morning, and we had an agenda to get our titles.
So, can you explain briefly how he made himself, or you suspected that he was your friend, but he turned out to be the person that complained about your recording of these lessons and these training sessions, and how that led to more tension for you?
Yeah, well, I was completely unaware, and that's just the thing, you know, and that's why I was saying earlier that you shouldn't go and try to fight for someone's cause if you don't really know them and know what their true purpose is regarding what they're going through, what they want to do with that. You don't assume what a person is like. And I, not knowing much about them other than the fact that, you know, we were co-workers and we met up at the same place every morning to get that check from Con Ed, I just assumed that, you know, okay, I haven't done anything to him. Why would he have a vendetta, or why would he be so concerned about my progression and what I'm doing? And, you know, see, whenever you're not the kind of person who will be a phony in the face of others, you don't really suspect that of others. And that might be a flaw of us sometimes, because we don't really see other people acting out like that because we can't see ourselves doing that. You know, so I had no clue that the dude was like complaining about the training that I was getting, or complaining about my method of training, or anything pertaining my employment in the company, because he never came and said anything to me. I was never mean to him. We never had a hostile relationship or camaraderie was bad or nothing like that between. There was no bad blood. You know, I was saying, hey, what's going on, Mike? He said, hey, Charles, and, you know, ask me a question. I may ask him when we talk about the day's current events, just typical co-worker stuff. You know, so it just, I had no clue until the depositions took place that he was the one responsible for complaining about my training and how I was getting my training while I was in the Bronx with him. Taught me a lot. It woke me up. You really don't know who you're dealing with. You got to be careful. You can't really trust people. You can't really trust people. You don't know, because people are not forthright with how they feel. You know, they'll go all around you complaining, but they won't say a word to you. And you're supposed to be their coworker, so-called friend on the job.
So is it safe to say that when companies say that we're a family, that's not an accurate statement, as the employees and the manager, they're not family. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And there was a Con Edison managerial employee that said as much. You know, they said when the union some time ago was at a point where they were like striking, or they were out during contract negotiations, this employee actually said, "We're not family. We're not family." So it's basically them and us.
That's important for the audience to think about when employers say that you're their family, and coworkers say that you're their friend. I would just focus on being professional and being courteous, but staying in a professional mindset and focus on solving whatever problems I'm dealing with, not necessarily developing a friendship and a family atmosphere. That's not what I would suggest people do.
Right. Yeah, because we're not living in an ideal world. In an ideal world, yeah, your coworkers would be your friends. You can count on them. You can trust them. But in the real world, you really can't. And also in the real world, people are not going to show their real face to you. They'll be in disguise. They hide what their true thoughts are about you for whatever their reasons are.
Okay, 2 more questions here. So, a union. What is the purpose of a union, and would you suggest that someone join one if their company has one?
Well, in most cases, if a company has more than a certain number of employees and they have a union associated with them, by law, you have to be a member of that union. So in most cases, we don't have a choice to be a member of that union. But if you're dissatisfied with that union, you can resign from that union and become what's called a Beck objector and be compensated for monies that you pay out for their representation. Because what we don't realize is that we're not obligated to pay for all of the stuff that unions spend your union dues on. And if you're not satisfied, you don't have to walk around feeling like there's no way out. And these people can just take advantage of you with no kind of, without having to answer to anybody. Because that's what it'll feel like sometimes. Unions are supposed to, in theory, represent the employee. But when I did research, I learned why unions were put in place to begin with. And it was to protect white people from from losing their jobs when slavery was banned and became unlawful. When the slaves got the ability to get jobs and become employed, many companies wanted to hire the slave because they could pay the slave less than the white workers were requiring and had gotten used to. You know, if the minimum wage at that time was $5 a day, the slave, having never made any money for their labor, was willing to take $2 per day. And so the companies were hiring up slaves. And so the unions came into place to protect the white workers. So when I went through what I went through, they told me everything. I realized that these people are not necessarily there for me. They didn't really care about me. And then when you look at the makeup of the union, you know, I don't really see many people in there like me. And, you know, the EEO departments are basically gone. You know, they've been replaced by the diversity departments and that kind of thing. It's like we don't really have any representation. Just go into it thinking that you're going to protect yourself, you're going to look out for yourself. Always cover yourself, do the right thing as best as possible, as best as you can. Have a plausible answer for whatever it is that you do. Don't try to get out and do stuff without thinking. Try to do the right thing so that you can explain your actions without looking like you weren't thinking like you're supposed to be, and like the job is hiring you to do, which is think on the job when you're doing it. But don't put too much stake in the union as far as representing you. I've seen enough to know that you can't count on the union.
So as a Beck objector, are you still required to pay dues, or you have to pay a percentage?
You are reimbursed a percentage at the end of each year. You don't have, the only thing you have to pay for is for the representation, like when the shop steward represents you, or they have to go in and sit at an arbitration on your behalf, and for the contract negotiations between the union and the company. That's the only thing you have to pay for as a Beck objector. And they still have to represent you in whole, not in part, in whole, as they would any other employee. But you don't have to pay for the dinners that they pay for, and the airline transportation that they use, and the money they spend for airline trips over to Washington, D.C. to lobby for certain laws and put in legislation. You don't have to pay for that stuff. All that extracurricular stuff that they spend money on, pizza parties, whatever it is that they do that doesn't pertain to them representing you and them conducting contract negotiations with the company, you don't have to pay for that. A lot of people don't know that.
So are you as a Beck objector, are you able to put in an application or a request to become this type of individual within a union, or is it something that you have to renew from time to time?
No, this is something that, well, at first you had to do it on a yearly basis. And I want to say this. It was never in my wildest dreams that I even think that I would wind up resigning from the union. But my experience with the union, it built up so much angst and distrust against unions, where it's like, I don't want nothing to do with a union because I saw what they were about. And I never thought that I would even be in a situation like this. But I'm just the kind of person where it's just like, I'm not going to allow that to go down, because I know that you people intentionally just push my case under the rug and you didn't stand by me. But in answer to your question, it used to be something that you had to do every year, because when I first heard about, when I first learned that I could become a Beck objector, I brought it to the attention of the union. I said, look, and I told them that in like November. It was like a month after I realized that the union just sold me out. And I learned of all the shenanigans that they pulled behind the scenes and didn't tell me. When I learned of that, immediately I went and I said, once I learned about the Beck objector opportunity that I could take on, I contacted the union and I told them that I wanted to become a Beck objector. And they told me, and this was in November, they said, well, you can only request to be a Beck objector in the month of April. And you had to send a letter to the union, and you had to do it with black ink. And you only had 30 days. You only had 30 days to do it. So
you can't use blue ink at all?
Huh? Oh, yeah.
You couldn't use blue ink?
Yeah, something like that. That's what I heard. And I'm like, okay. And I waited. December. April couldn't get there fast enough. And once April came, I got my black pen, typed up. I got my black ink. I wrote a letter, hand wrote it, and I got it notarized, and I sent it to the union. And they told me that, okay, you're going to become a Beck objector. We're acknowledging your Beck objector status, and I would be reimbursed a portion of my dues that Beck objectors are entitled to be reimbursed, and that I had to do it all over again the following year in April. If I wanted to continue being a Beck objector, I had to write another letter to them requesting it. And so I told them that I wanted my Beck objector status to be ongoing, meaning that this is not going to change. I have no interest in being a part of the union, a full member of the union like that. If it wasn't for the law requiring me to be a member, a member of the union, I wouldn't be a member at all, based on my experience with them. And so they sent me my first check, and then the next year, they didn't send me my check, even though I wrote the letter telling them that, hey, I still want to be a Beck objector, and they didn't send me my check, and so I filed a grievance against them. And at that point, they acknowledged that I wanted to be a Beck objector. I wanted it to be ongoing, and they reimbursed me my check. And ever since then, at that point, I learned that they said no longer do you have to write this letter every year. If you state that you want to be a Beck objector permanently, then we're going to acknowledge it as ongoing. And ever since then, I've been, and this is since 2010.
Are you still with Con Edison?
Yes.
So is things more smoothly now, or is it still some tension there?
No, everything is fine now. I mean, I don't have to work around those people that I had that experience with. I'm no longer in the Bronx. I went to another location where the people were cool, and it was a whole different thing over there, although there was an attempt to poison them about me as well, but it didn't work. And I ultimately got my senior title, and it's just nothing but camaraderie between me and my coworkers, management. I had a good experience with them up to this point. I'm over in Queens. It's a whole different vibe, whole different scenario. But I had to tell what went on because a lot of people are still living that. They're still going through that. So although everything is good with me now and I support the brand, I had to deal with the negative aspects that the brand had inflicted on me. And I told that story. And I gave a full account of what happened so that the people who are going through it now can know that there's light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. And to show them that there's a way to deal with what they're going through.
Got it. So if someone wanted to buy this book and read about your story and hopefully take some suggestions from your book and implement them, where would they be able to find your book?
They can find it at barnesandnoble.com. It's at Barnes & Noble. You can get it on Amazon, amazon.com. There's a Kindle version as well. You got the paperback and you got a Kindle version. And I'm working on an Audible version as well. And that's going to come soon. There's just a lot on the plate that I'm doing right now. So it'll take a minute, but the Audible version is coming as well.
All right. I'll be sure to put the Amazon and also the Barnes & Noble link in the description. Do you have any social media that, if anybody wanted to get in contact with you? I know you do music. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah, you can reach me at on Twitter at Charles Bronxon, CHAS, as in Sam, Bronx, son, as in son of the Bronx, at Charles Bronxon on Twitter, and you can reach me on Instagram. My handle is at Mound Records, MOUN Records, plural. And that's like a picture's mound without the D, MOUN Records. And you can visit my YouTube channel, which is Mound Records. You type up Mound Records, MOUN Records, and you'll see that MR logo. And that's my channel, and you can see, whatever music video content that has been posted. Some pretty interesting stuff.
What type of music do you do?
Well, I'm a writer. I do R&B, and I do I write spoken word and hip hop as well, but primarily R&B. The focus is on writing. I have some stuff out there. We just came out of Black Music Month, and there's a project that I did called Group Hugs. And the Hugs is an acronym for honoring unforgettable groups of soul, where I paid tribute to all of the R&B groups from like the 1940s all the way up to the present. And I did all the vocals. I did a song called Pretext, and that's another acronym. Stands for Prejudice Restricts Exposing Today's Extraordinary Talent, where it talks about the appropriation of black music by white artists. And that phenomenon that has been taking place way back since the days of Little Richard and Pat Boone. Just to show that it's nothing new, where, white artists like Robin Thicke or Justin Timberlake will take that black music and sell a gazillion copies, where as a black artist doing that same music would only sell a few 100,000 because it's promoted more when it's done by the white artists. This is nothing new. And that project was like in commemoration of Black Music Month, and you might find that interesting. And also we came from Father's Day a couple of weeks ago. It's a project you could check out called I Miss My Daddy by a 15-year-old girl that I produced. And that's something that you might find interesting as well. So, yeah, you can reach me at those spots.
I found it interesting that Marvin Gaye, in your book you was talking about Marvin Gaye, Let's Get It On was the source of that ad executive's suggestion for the tagline. I found that to be hilarious.
Yeah, that was kind of eye-opening for me too.
All right, cool. Well, I appreciated talking to you. Learned a lot. Hopefully the viewers get an understanding of your story, and hopefully they learn something and put some of your suggestions into action.
I appreciate that. And they can also check out my website, moundrecords.com, as well. There's contact information there too. But I appreciate you taking the time to talk about the book and share it with your audience. I'd like the link so I can share it with my followers. I certainly will once I get the link.
No doubt. Next week.
Okay. It's good
appreciate
talking
it,
with
man.
you. Yeah. Well, you're doing your thing, man. I appreciate that again. Thanks, man.
No doubt, man. I'll get you out that link, and thanks again, man.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for watching this video. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Stay up to date for more videos by clicking the bell notification icon and following our social media. For any of the people, groups, companies, or videos that were referenced in this video, don't forget to check the description and/or the pinned comment section. The Question Lane, solving problems through the process of questions and answers.